The medical frigate Hope's Promise drifted through the cold darkness of space near the Orion Nebula. It was a small ship, painted white with red crosses on its hull to show that it carried no weapons. The vessel was on a simple mission to bring medicine and doctors to a distant human colony that needed help. Commander Lisa Morgan sat in her captain's chair and watched the stars through the main window. She was a calm woman of 42 years with short brown hair and tired eyes. She had served in space for 20 years, but she had never fired a weapon at another living being. She was a healer, not a fighter. Her crew of 47 people worked quietly around her. Most of them were women because medical ships always needed more nurses and doctors than soldiers. 31 women served aboard the Hope's Promise, and Lisa knew each of them by name. She knew their families, their dreams, their fears. The ship's sensor officer, a young man named Danny Brooks, suddenly sat up straight in his chair. His face went pale as he stared at his screen. "Commander," he said, his voice shaking, "I'm detecting 3 ships coming out of hyperspace. They're big. Really big." Lisa felt her stomach drop. "Can you identify them?" Danny worked his controls with trembling fingers. "Valkyrie destroyers, ma'am. 3 of them. They're moving to surround us." The bridge went silent. Everyone knew about the Valkyrie Empire. They were an ancient civilization of insect-like aliens who had conquered dozens of worlds over thousands of years. Humanity had tried to avoid them, but space was vast and meetings were sometimes unavoidable. Lisa stood up slowly. "Open a channel to them. Tell them we are a medical ship with no weapons. We pose no threat." The communication officer, a woman named Rachel Torres, sent the message. For a long moment, there was no response. Then the main screen flickered and showed a face that made several crew members gasp. The Valkyrie commander was terrifying to look at. He stood 7 feet tall, with a body covered in black armor that was part of his own skin. His head was shaped like an insect's, with large compound eyes and mandibles that clicked together when he spoke. A translation device around his neck turned his sounds into human words. "Human vessel," the alien said. "You are now property of the Valkyrie Empire. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction." Lisa stepped forward. "We are a medical ship protected under the Galactic Conventions. We carry doctors and medicine, nothing more. We request safe passage according to interstellar law." The Valkyrie made a sound that might have been laughter. His mandibles clicked rapidly. "I am War Chief Rextel of the Imperial Fleet. Your laws mean nothing to us. You are prey. Prey has no rights." The screen went dark. Lisa turned to her crew. She saw fear in their eyes, but also trust. They were looking to her for guidance. "Power down the engines," she said quietly. "Do not resist. Our lives are more valuable than this ship. Whatever happens, we stay calm and we stay together." The Valkyrie boarded within the hour. Their soldiers came through the airlocks like a flood of nightmares. They were all tall, all covered in that terrible natural armor, all carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They pushed the human crew into the main cargo bay without gentleness or care. War Chief Rextel walked among the prisoners, studying them with those alien eyes. He stopped in front of Lisa and looked down at her. "Soft creatures," he said to his officers. "No claws, no armor, no poison. How did they ever spread across so many worlds? It is a mystery." Lisa met his gaze without looking away. "We spread because we help each other. We work together. We build instead of destroy." Rextel's mandibles clicked. Pretty words from a prisoner. He turned to his soldiers. "Separate them. The males go to the labor camp on Frost Moon 7. They can work in the mines. Until they die." He paused and looked at the 31. Women huddled together in the corner of the cargo bay. The Females go to Research Station Theta 7. High Command wants to understand human biology better. They will serve that purpose. Lisa felt ice spread through her body. What do you mean? What research? Rextol did not answer. He simply walked away, his armored feet clicking on the metal floor. The women were pulled away from the men despite their screams and protests. Lisa tried to reach Danny and the other male crew members, but a Velthari soldier struck her across the face and knocked her to the ground. Blood filled her mouth as she watched her crew being torn apart. The men were loaded onto one shuttle. The women were loaded onto another. Lisa was the last to board, pushed through the door by rough alien hands. She found herself in a dark hold with 30 other terrified women. Some were crying. Some were praying. Some were simply staring at nothing, their minds unable to process what was happening. A young nurse named Maria Santos crawled over to Lisa and grabbed her hand. "Commander, what's going to happen to us? What did he mean about research?" Lisa squeezed her hand but could not find words. She had heard rumors about Velthari research stations. Terrible rumors that she had always hoped were just stories. The shuttle lifted off and carried them away from the hope's promise. Through a small window, Lisa watched her ship grow smaller and smaller until it was just a dot among the stars. Then it was gone. The journey to Research Station Theta 7 took 3 days. During that time, the women were given little food and less water. They were not told where they were going or what would happen when they arrived. They held each other and tried to stay strong. When the shuttle finally docked, the women were marched through cold metal corridors that smelled of chemicals and something else. Something that made Lisa's skin crawl. It smelled like fear and pain and death. They were brought to a large room filled with examination tables and strange machines. Velthari scientists waited there, their instruments ready. Their compound eyes showing no emotion at all. The head scientist, a creature named Krelvex, looked at the prisoners and spoke to his assistants. "Begin the standard procedures. Document everything. High Command wants detailed reports on human female anatomy and pain responses." Lisa understood then what was about to happen. She understood that she and her crew had not been captured. They had been collected. Like specimens. Like animals for a laboratory. She screamed and fought, but it did not matter. The Velthari were too strong. The nightmare was just beginning, and there would be no waking up. But Lisa did not know that far away. In the holding cell of a frozen moon, Danny Brooks was working on a plan. He had managed to hide a small communication device, and he was determined to tell humanity what the Velthari had done. The Empire had made a terrible mistake. They had forgotten that humans never abandon their own. 3 months passed on the frozen moon where the male prisoners worked in the mines. The cold cut through their thin clothes like knives. The food was barely enough to keep them alive. The Velthari guards beat anyone who worked too slowly, but Danny Brooks kept his secret. The small communication device stayed hidden inside a hollow space he had carved in the heel of his boot. Every night, when the other prisoners slept, he worked on it. He had been trained as a communications technician, and he knew how to build things from nothing. The other men helped him when they could. They smuggled small pieces of wire and metal from the mines. They distracted the guards while Danny worked. They all knew that the women were somewhere out there, and they refused to give up hope. One night, Danny finally finished his work. He had built a device that could tap into Velthari communication signals. It was crude and weak, but it worked. He spent 2 weeks listening to alien transmissions, learning their codes, understanding their systems. Most of what he heard was boring military talk about supplies and schedules. But then, on a cold night when his fingers were almost too frozen to work, he found something that changed everything. The transmission came from Research Station Theta 7. It was a scientific report sent to Velthari High Command. Danny decoded it with shaking hands and growing horror. The report contained images, data files, medical records, documentation of experiments that had been performed on human subjects. Female human subjects. Danny read every word. He looked at every image. He forced himself to document everything, even though it made him sick, even though tears froze on his face. He needed to know. Humanity needed to know. 20-3 of the 31 women were already dead. The experiments had been conducted without any medicine to stop the pain. The Valkyrie scientists had studied how humans responded to different types of harm. They had treated the women like objects, not people. The reports described their work in cold, clinical language that made it even more terrible. The 8 remaining women were in very bad condition. Commander Lisa Morgan was still alive, but the report said she had stopped speaking weeks ago. She simply stared at the walls and waited for death. Danny knew what he had to do. He reprogrammed his device to send a single burst transmission to the nearest human relay station. It would use all his power, and the Valkyrie would certainly detect it. But he did not care. He gathered the other prisoners and told them what he had found. He showed them the images, the reports, the evidence of what had been done to their friends. Strong men wept. Others became so angry they could barely speak. "When I send this transmission," Danny said, "the guards will come. They will probably kill me. But this information will reach Earth. Humanity will know." A miner named Frank Ortega put his hand on Danny's shoulder. "Send it. We'll buy you as much time as we can." Danny pressed the button and sent the transmission into the stars. Seconds later, alarms began to sound throughout the prison complex. Valkyrie guards came running with weapons ready. The prisoners fought them. They had no weapons, only their fists and their fury. They knew they could not win, but they gave Danny precious extra seconds to make sure the transmission was complete. The guards beat Danny badly when they finally reached him. They broke his ribs and his nose and several of his teeth. But he smiled through the blood and pain. "You have no idea what you've done," he whispered to them. "No idea at all." The transmission traveled through space at the speed of light. It bounced from relay station to relay station until it reached the fleet carrier, Relentless, the flagship of Admiral Catherine Webb. Catherine was 61 years old, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She had served in the human navy for 30 years and had seen many terrible things. But nothing had prepared her for the files that appeared on her screen that morning. She watched the images in complete silence. Her hands began to shake. Her face became pale, then red with anger. She recognized some of the women in the files. Lisa Morgan had served under her command years ago. Catherine had personally recommended her for the medical ship posting. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Paul Hartley, stood nearby. He had watched the files too. He looked like he might be sick. "Admiral," he said quietly, "what do we do?" Catherine's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with cold fire. "Get me a secure channel to Earth Command. And Paul, prepare every ship in the fleet for immediate deployment. Every single one." The transmission reached Earth 12 hours later. President Daniel Reyes watched the files in his office with his senior advisors. No one spoke for a long time after the images ended. Finally, the president stood up. His face was calm, but his voice was like ice. "Call an emergency session of the Global Assembly," he said. "Every representative from every nation. We meet in 6 hours." The assembly hall was packed when President Reyes took the podium. The files played on giant screens behind him. Though the worst images had been hidden to protect people from the full horror. "The Valkyrie Empire has committed acts of evil against our people," the president said. "Acts that go beyond warfare. Acts that show they see us as nothing, more than animals to be studied and discarded." He paused and looked across the assembled leaders. I am asking this body for a declaration of total war against the Velthri Empire. Not a limited response. Not a careful action. Total war. We will fight until they surrender completely, or until their empire no longer exists. The vote was unanimous. Every nation on Earth agreed. For the first time in human history, the entire species was united in a single purpose. The news spread quickly. Despite efforts to control the information, the unedited files leaked to the public within days. People saw what had been done to their daughters and sisters and mothers. The reaction was like a volcano erupting. Military recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Factories switched from making civilian products to making weapons overnight. Scientists stopped their peaceful research and began working on new ways to fight. The entire human civilization transformed itself for war. Admiral Webb was given command of the newly formed Retribution Fleet. She gathered her captains in the briefing room of the Relentless and showed them the images of the dead women on a large screen. These were healers, she said. They dedicated their lives to helping others. The Velthri tortured them to death because they were curious about our biology. She looked at each captain in turn. We are going to make the Velthri understand what happens when you hurt humanity. We will teach them a lesson they will never forget. And we will make sure that no alien civilization ever thinks about treating our people this way again. She activated a map of Velthri space. Our first target is Research Station Theta 7. We rescue any survivors. We recover our dead. And then we begin destroying the Velthri Empire piece by piece. The captains saluted and left to prepare their ships. The largest military fleet in human history was about to launch. The Velthri had no idea what was coming. Humanity was done being prey. Now they would become the hunters. The Velthri had hidden Research Station Theta 7 well. It floated in an asteroid belt around a dead star where no light reached. The aliens believed it was impossible to find. They were wrong. Human intelligence officers had worked day and night to locate the station. They decoded transmissions, analyzed shipping routes, and questioned captured Velthri soldiers. Within 3 weeks, they had the exact coordinates. Admiral Webb gathered her fleet at the edge of the system. 47 warships, 15 troop transports, and over 10,000 Marines waited in the darkness. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled in one place. The Admiral stood on the bridge of the Relentless and looked at the distant asteroids on her screen. Somewhere in that field of rocks, her people were suffering. Some were already dead. But she would bring them all home one way or another. All ships, she said into her communicator, begin the attack. The fleet moved forward like a wave of steel and fire. The Velthri defending the station had only 12 ships, and they were not prepared for what hit them. Human weapons were faster and more powerful than anything the aliens had faced before. Railguns punched through their armor like it was paper. Missiles found their targets no matter how the enemy tried to escape. The battle lasted 4 hours. By the end, all 12 Velthri ships were destroyed or captured. Not a single human vessel was lost. Marine Captain Ben Torres led the ground assault on the station itself. He was a big man with a shaved head and eyes that had seen too much death. But nothing had prepared him for what he found inside. His team moved through the corridors with weapons ready. The station was huge, with hundreds of rooms connected by metal hallways. The smell hit them first. It was a smell of chemicals and blood and something worse. The smell of suffering. They found the human section near the center of the station. The door was locked with heavy security, but the Marines blasted through it in seconds. Captain Torres was the first one inside. He stopped so suddenly that the soldier behind him crashed into his back. The room was filled with machines and tables and tubes filled with colored liquids. But that was not what made Torres stop. What made him stop were the bodies. 20-3 women floated in large glass containers, preserved in some kind of fluid. Their eyes were closed, their faces peaceful in death. But the marks on their bodies showed that their deaths had been anything but peaceful. Torres felt his hands start to shake. He recognized some of these women from the files. Young women, doctors, nurses, people who had spent their lives helping others. "Find the survivors," he ordered, his voice rough with emotion. Now, the Marines spread out through the facility. They found 8 women still alive in a separate section. The prisoners were in terrible condition. They had been kept in small cages like animals, their bodies covered in scars and wounds from months of experimentation. Commander Lisa Morgan was among them. Torres knelt beside her cage and looked into her eyes. They were empty, staring at nothing. She did not seem to know he was there. "Commander Morgan," he said gently, "I'm Captain Torres of the United Earth Marines. We're here to take you home." For a long moment, Lisa did not respond. Then, slowly, her eyes focused on his face. Her cracked lips moved. "Home?" she whispered. The word sounded like she had forgotten what it meant. Torres felt tears running down his cheeks. "Yes, ma'am, home. You're safe now." The medics arrived and began treating the survivors. The Marines documented everything in the station. Every room, every machine, every file. They recorded the evidence of what the Velthari had done so that the whole galaxy would know. The head scientist, Krelvix, was captured trying to escape in a small shuttle. He was brought before Captain Torres with his hands bound. "You have no right to do this," the alien said through his translator. "This was legitimate scientific research. Your species is inferior. You should be honored to contribute to our knowledge." Torres stared at the alien for a long time. His hand rested on his weapon. Every part of him wanted to kill this creature right there. But he was a soldier, not a murderer. "You will face trial for what you did," he said finally. "Human justice. Real justice. And then you will pay for every life you took." The survivors were transported to the hospital ship Mercy. The bodies of the dead were recovered with full military honors, wrapped in flags and carried by Marines who wept as they walked. Admiral Webb came aboard the station after it was secured. She walked through the rooms where the women had been held, where they had suffered, where they had died. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes told a different story. She found Captain Torres in the main laboratory, staring at the empty containers that had held the bodies. "Admiral," he said without turning around, "what do we do with this place?" Webb looked around at the machines and tables and instruments of torture. "We take everything useful. Every piece of data, every bit of evidence. The galaxy will see what the Velthari did here." She paused. "And then we destroy this station so completely that nothing remains. Not a single piece of metal. Not a single molecule. This place will cease to exist." The evacuation took 2 days. Every file was copied. Every piece of equipment was cataloged. The Marines worked without rest, driven by anger and grief. When the station was finally empty, Admiral Webb gave the order. Every ship in the fleet fired at once. Missiles and railgun rounds and energy beams converged on Research Station Theta 7. The explosions continued for hours until nothing remained but expanding gas and dust as the fleet prepared to leave. A communication came through from Velthari High Command. They demanded an explanation for the attack. They threatened consequences. They spoke of treaties and laws and diplomatic solutions. Admiral Webb recorded her response personally. "You kept records of your crimes," she said into the camera. "Your own scientists documented everything they did to our people. We have your files. We have your evidence. We have your guilt." Her eyes were cold and hard. "There will be no negotiation with you. There will be no treaty. There will be no peace. There will only be consequences. We are coming for you, and we will not stop until your empire is dust." She ended the transmission and turned to her navigation officer. "Set a course for the Valkyrie core worlds. The war has just begun." Behind her, through the window, the debris field that had once been Research Station Theta 7 slowly faded into the darkness. The women had been avenged, but humanity's anger was far from satisfied. The Valkyrie Empire had existed for 3,000 years. They were about to learn that some enemies should never be made. The surrender ceremony took place on a warm morning on the Valkyrie homeworld. Millions of aliens watched from their homes as their leaders walked to the steps of the Imperial Palace to end 3,000 years of empire. Admiral Catherine Webb stood at the top of the steps waiting for them. She wore her dress uniform with every medal she had earned during her long career. But she had added something that was not part of any regulation. A small photograph was pinned above her heart. It showed the 31 women of the Hope's Promise, smiling in a picture taken before their final voyage. The Valkyrie leaders climbed the steps slowly. Their movements showed their defeat better than words ever could. War Chief Rexdal was among them. He was the officer who had captured the Hope's Promise and sent the women to their deaths. His compound eyes looked at the ground. He could not face the human admiral. The formal documents were signed without speeches or ceremony. The Valkyrie Empire officially surrendered to the United Earth government. Their military was dissolved. Their leaders were taken into custody. Their crimes would be judged by courts from across the galaxy. Rexdal was tried 6 months later. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own communications proved that he knew exactly what would happen to the women he sent to Research Station Theta 7. He showed no regret during the trial. He still believed that humans were prey, and that prey had no rights. He was found guilty of crimes against sentient beings and executed according to galactic law. His death was not celebrated. It was simply recorded as the end of a monster. But the war's true conclusion came 1 year later on Earth. In Geneva, in the plaza before the United Earth government headquarters, a memorial was dedicated to the women who had died. The monument was simple but powerful. 31 pillars of white marble stood in a circle, each one representing a woman who had been taken. Each pillar showed a name, a face, and a short story of who that person had been. Doctors, nurses, technicians, daughters, sisters, mothers, friends, people who had dedicated their lives to healing others. At the center of the circle stood a larger pillar made of black stone. Words were carved into it that would become humanity's promise to itself and its warning to the galaxy. The dedication ceremony drew millions of people. They filled the plaza and the streets around it. They watched on screens across every human world. This was not just a memorial. It was a statement about who humanity was and what they would do for their own. President Daniel Reyes spoke first. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion. "We gather today to remember 31 women who should not have died. They were healers who went into space to help others. They were captured by an enemy who saw them as nothing more than objects to study. They were tortured and killed for curiosity, without mercy, without compassion, without any recognition that they were thinking, feeling beings." He paused and looked at the marble pillars. "We can't bring them back. Nothing we do will ever fill the empty spaces they left in their families, their communities, their worlds. But we can promise them this: we will never forget them. We will never stop honoring their memory. And we will never allow something like this to happen again." The 8 survivors of the research station were present at the ceremony. They sat in the front row, some in wheelchairs, all still bearing the scars of what they had endured. Commander Lisa Morgan was among them. She had spent the past year in treatment, slowly rebuilding her mind and body. She would never be the same person she was before. No one who had been through what she experienced could be. But she had found enough strength to speak at the ceremony. When it was her turn, Lisa walked slowly to the podium. Her steps were unsteady, and an aide stood nearby in case she needed help. But she reached the podium on her own and looked down at the sea of faces watching her. "We were supposed to heal people," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. That was our mission, our purpose. We spent our lives learning how to help others, how to ease pain, how to save lives. The Hope's promise was a ship of mercy. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she did not stop. The Veltari did not understand that. They looked at us and saw only soft creatures, without claws or armor. They thought our compassion made us weak. They thought helping others was a waste of resources. They could not imagine why anyone would choose to be a healer instead of a warrior. She turned to look at the marble pillars behind her. 23 of my friends died because of that misunderstanding. 23 women who had families waiting for them, dreams they wanted to chase, futures they would never have. They died. In pain and fear, far from home, surrounded by enemies who saw them as nothing. Lisa faced the crowd again. But what the Veltari did not understand is that humanity is not weak because we care for each other. We are strong because of it. When they hurt our people, every human felt that pain. When they killed our sisters, every human felt that rage. The Veltari thought they were studying specimens. They were actually uniting the most dangerous species in the galaxy against themselves. She stood straighter, her voice growing stronger. Humanity came for us. They crossed light years of space, fought through enemy fleets, and tore apart a 3,000-year-old empire to rescue 8 survivors and bring home 23 bodies. They did this because human lives matter, every single one. Lisa pointed to the memorial. That is who we are. That is what we do. We protect our own. We avenge our dead. We never give up and we never forget. Any species that thinks about harming humanity should look at these pillars and remember what happened to the Veltari. She paused and looked at the central pillar with its carved words. The inscription on that stone is not just a memorial. It is a promise and a warning. Every intelligent species in the galaxy should read it and understand what it means. She read the words aloud. They were healers, not warriors. They offered help, not harm. They were murdered for curiosity, without mercy or remorse. We remember them. We honor them. And we will never forgive those who took them from us. To all who would harm humanity, look upon this memorial and understand. We will find you, we will reach you, and we will make you answer for every drop of blood you spill. Lisa stepped back from the podium. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then someone began to clap. Others joined. The applause grew until it was like thunder rolling across the plaza. After the ceremony, people lined up for hours to visit the memorial. They touched the marble pillars and read the names. They looked at the faces of women they had never met, but would always remember. They made private promises to themselves and to the dead. The memorial became the most visited site on Earth. Leaders from other species came to see it. Some came to pay respects. Others came to understand what humanity was capable of. All of them left with the same understanding. Humans were kind. Humans were generous. Humans would help strangers and heal enemies. But humans also had a line that could never be crossed. Those who crossed it would face consequences beyond imagination. The galaxy had learned this lesson at the cost of an empire. It would not forget. Years later, when asked about the war and its outcome, Admiral Webb gave an interview. She was old by then, retired and living quietly on a small farm. But her eyes still had that cold fire. "We are not a violent species by nature," she said. "We prefer peace. We prefer cooperation. We have spent our existence reaching out to others, trying to build bridges and find common ground." She paused and looked out the window at the setting sun. But when someone hurts our people, something changes in us. We become something else. Something the Veltari never expected. something that would not stop, would not slow down, would not rest until justice was done. She turned back to the interviewer. That is the lesson of the Hope's Promise. That is what the memorial teaches. Humanity will always prefer friendship. But if you force us to be enemies, you will face the full fury of our species. And you will not survive it. The memorial still stands in Geneva. Every year, on the anniversary of the women's deaths, people gather there to remember. They speak the names of the 31. They renew the promise carved in stone. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species remember too. They remember what happened to the Velthari Empire when they crossed the line. They remember the lesson that was written in fire and blood across 1,000 worlds. Do not harm humanity, because humanity never forgets. And humanity always strikes back. The Velthari Empire had ruled 1,000 worlds for 3,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species and built a civilization they believed could never fall. They had never faced an enemy like humanity. Human warships came out of hyperspace like angry wasps, fast and deadly. The Velthari had always relied on their size and armor to win battles. But human weapons cut through their defenses like they were made of nothing. Railguns fired metal rods at incredible speeds that punched clean through the thickest hulls. Missiles tracked their targets through any maneuver and exploded with devastating force. But technology was only part of why the Velthari lost. The real difference was something the aliens could not understand. Humans were not just fighting a war. They were fighting for vengeance. Every soldier, every pilot, every crew member had seen the images from Research Station Theta 7. They carried that fury into every battle. The first major fight happened at a Velthari colony called Nexus Prime. It was an important world with shipyards and factories and millions of alien citizens. The defending fleet had 60 ships. The humans brought 20. Admiral Webb commanded the battle from the Relentless. She watched the enemy formation on her tactical display and saw exactly what the Velthari commander was thinking. They expected the humans to be careful with fewer ships. They expected a slow, cautious approach. Webb smiled coldly. All ships, attack pattern Delta, full speed ahead. No hesitation. The human fleet charged straight at the enemy line. The Velthari were shocked by the aggressive move. They had never seen prey behave this way. By the time they adjusted their tactics, it was too late. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, all 60 Velthari ships were destroyed or captured. The humans lost 3 vessels. The colony surrendered without further fighting. The survivors were treated according to human rules of war. They were given food, water, and medical care. They were not tortured. They were not experimented on. The difference between human behavior and Velthari behavior was noticed by everyone watching. Other species across the galaxy paid attention to what was happening. Many of them had been conquered by the Velthari long ago. They watched humanity's campaign with growing hope. Commander Samuel Drake became famous during the war. He led a squadron of fast destroyers on raids deep into enemy territory, attacking supply convoys and communication stations. The Velthari called him the Ghost of Orion because he seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish before they could respond. Drake's hatred for the Velthari was personal. His younger sister Amy had been a nurse on the Hope's Promise. She was one of the 23 women who died at the research station. Drake kept her picture on his command console, where he could see it during every battle. Every convoy we destroy shortens the war, he told his crew. Every supply line we cut is another step toward ending this. We don't stop until it's over. We don't stop until my sister is avenged. His squadron destroyed over 200 enemy ships in 8 months. They became heroes across human space, symbols of what determination and skill could accomplish. The war spread across Velthari territory like fire. Human forces took world after world, system after system. The Empire's military was powerful, but it had never faced an enemy who would not give up. Human soldiers fought when they were outnumbered. Human ships attacked when they were outgunned. Human commanders found ways to win battles that should have been impossible. Month after month, the Empire shrank. Their factories were destroyed. Their fleets were defeated. Their soldiers began to surrender rather than fight. The Velthari had ruled through fear for thousands of years, but now they were the ones who were afraid. Other species that the Velthari had conquered saw their chance. On a dozen worlds, slave populations rose up against their masters. They had been waiting for this moment for generations, and humanity's war gave them the opportunity they needed. The Crow, a race of peaceful plant-like beings, had been enslaved by the Velthari for 500 years. When human ships arrived in their system, the Krell helped them by sabotaging Velthari defenses from the inside. Thousands of Krell died in the uprising, but their world was freed for the first time in centuries. The Mordic, a warrior species that had been nearly wiped out by the Empire, sent their remaining ships to fight alongside humanity. They were not many, but they were fierce, and they remembered every wrong the Velthari had done to their people. "We never forgot," the Mordic war leader told Admiral Webb when they met. "We always knew that someday someone would make the Velthari pay. We are honored that it is humanity." The war lasted 18 months. During that time, human forces conquered 47 Velthari systems. The Empire's economy collapsed. Their military was broken. Their population lived in fear of what would happen next. Finally, the Velthari High Council sent a message requesting peace talks. They were ready to negotiate. Admiral Webb met their representatives on a neutral space station. The Velthari delegation was led by an old diplomat named Trelmac. He wore the finest clothes of his species and tried to present himself with dignity. But his hands shook, and his compound eyes could not meet Webb's gaze. "Surely we can find a peaceful solution," Trelmac said. What happened at the research station was terrible, but it was the work of criminals who acted without authority. The Empire as a whole should not be punished for their crimes. Webb sat perfectly still across the table from him. Her voice was quiet and cold. "Stop," she said. The single word silenced everyone in the room. "We have your communications. We have orders signed by members of your High Council approving those experiments. Do not lie to me." She pushed a document across the table. "These are our terms. You will read them. You will accept them. There will be no negotiation, no changes, no discussion." Trelmac looked at the document with growing horror. The terms were harsh. The Velthari military would be reduced to a defensive force only. They would pay compensation to humanity and to every species they had wronged. War criminals would be handed over for trial, and they would never, ever be allowed to expand their territory again. "This is the death of our empire," Trelmac whispered. Webb nodded slowly. "Yes, it is. You had a choice, and you chose to torture our people for curiosity. Now you live with the consequences." She stood up to leave. "You have 24 hours to accept these terms. If you refuse, we will continue fighting until there is no Velthari Empire left. The choice is yours." The Velthari Council debated for 12 hours. Some wanted to fight on. Others said the war was already lost. In the end, they had no real choice. Their fleet was destroyed. Their worlds were occupied. Their people were starving. They accepted the terms. The surrender ceremony was scheduled for the steps of the Velthari Imperial Palace on their homeworld. After 3,000 years of conquest and cruelty, the Empire would finally answer for its crimes. Humanity had won. But the scars of what the Velthari had done would never fully heal. The 31 women of the Hope's Promise could not be brought back. Their deaths had changed everything, and the galaxy would never be the same.